Have you ever measured a person's worth by the frayed edges of their uniform, by the weariness in their posture, or the cheap, sensible shoes on their feet? We all have, in a glance, in a quiet moment of judgment. But what if the person you dismissed as insignificant was the very architect of the world you were standing in? What if the low-level caregiver you belittled held the power to dismantle your entire, carefully constructed reality? This is not just a story of a hidden identity. It is a story of what happens when the powerless are revealed to hold all the power, when the quiet corridors of a retirement home become a battlefield for a company's very soul, and when one woman's calculated cruelty threatens to expose a rot that goes deeper than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me, because the most important truths are often hidden in the plainest sight. Eleanor Vance felt like a fraud in the kingdom she had built. From her office on the 60th floor of the Vance Living headquarters in downtown Boston, she had a panoramic view of the city, a glittering expanse of steel and glass. But her mind was miles away, in the hushed, carpeted hallways of the Pinnacle at Crestwood Manor, the flagship facility of her multi-billion-dollar empire of luxury retirement communities. Vance Living was her life's work. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a creation born from grief and determination. Her father, a simple carpenter, had spent his last years in a state-run facility that smelled of despair and bleach. After he passed, Eleanor, then a young architectural graduate with more ambition than capital, had vowed to build something better. She started with one small 8-room home, personally designing every detail to feel like a residence, not an institution. She believed in dignity, in sunlight, in the smell of baking bread, not antiseptic. Now, 20 years later, Vance Living had over 100 properties across the country, synonymous with unparalleled care and opulent comfort. She wore Tom Ford suits like a second skin, her silver-streaked blonde hair swept into an immaculate chignon. She negotiated land deals and healthcare partnerships with a surgeon's precision. She was a titan of industry, a celebrated philanthropist, a success story, but a single anonymous email forwarded to her personal account by a loyalist in the IT department had shattered her peace. The email was from a burner account, its language desperate and fearful. It spoke of the Pinnacle, her jewel, her proof of concept. It alleged understaffing, neglect, and a culture of fear under its director, Beatrice Albright. It mentioned residents left waiting for assistance, medication schedules being fudged, and quality supplies being replaced with cheap, inferior substitutes. The official reports that crossed her desk painted a different picture. The Pinnacle boasted the highest efficiency ratings and the lowest staff turnover. On paper. Beatrice Albright was lauded in quarterly reviews as a model of fiscal responsibility and stern, effective management. Eleanor had even presented her with an award at the annual gala 6 months ago. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a gentle rumble from a lifetime ago. "You can build the prettiest house in the world, Ellie," he used to say, sanding a piece of oak. "But if the foundation is rotten, it's just a pretty tomb." The idea was a spark of madness, a reckless impulse that defied every corporate protocol. She couldn't send a team of auditors. Albright would see them coming a mile away, put on a show, and bury the truth deeper. To find a rot in the foundation, you had to get down in the dirt. You had to become part of the structure nobody ever looks at. She needed to see it for herself. Not as Eleanor Vance, the CEO, but as someone invisible. Someone no one would ever suspect. Her first and only call was to Marcus Thorne, her head of security and the closest thing she had to a confidant. Marcus was a former Secret Service agent who had been with her since the beginning. He was unflappable, discreet, and fiercely loyal. You want me to do what, Miss Vance?" His voice, usually a calm baritone, was strained with disbelief over the encrypted line. "You heard me, Marcus. I need a new identity, a caregiver, entry level. I want a spot at the pinnacle. Create a plausible backstory for a woman in her late 40s, down on her luck, re-entering the workforce. My name will be Ellie Mayhew. And Marcus, no one can know. Not the board, not my assistant, no one." There was a long, heavy silence. Eleanor could picture him in his sterile office, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Arthur would have called this brilliantly insane," Marcus finally said, using her father's name, a privilege he rarely took. "He always said you built this company with your hands, not just your head. All right, Miss Vance, let's get Ellie Mayhew a job. I hope you remember how to make a bed." The metamorphosis was profound and unsettling. Eleanor Vance vanished, her designer suits and Italian leather shoes replaced by purchases from a discount store. She bought several pairs of drab polyester slacks, faded polo shirts in washed-out pastels, and a pair of thick-soled, brutally unflattering non-slip sneakers. She let her hair down from its chignon, allowing the silver strands to mix untidily with the blonde, and tied it back with a simple elastic band. She removed her Cartier watch and her understated pearl earrings, leaving her lobes bare. Looking in the full-length mirror of her penthouse dressing room, she was confronted by a stranger. The woman staring back looked worn, anxious, and utterly unremarkable. The aura of quiet authority she had cultivated for 2 decades was gone, replaced by a palpable vulnerability. This was Ellie Mayhew, and she was utterly, terrifyingly believable. Her first day at the pinnacle was a descent into a different reality. She entered through a rear service door, a world away from the grand, sun-drenched atrium where a concierge greeted residents by name. The back of house was a maze of beige corridors, humming with the drone of industrial laundry machines and smelling faintly of overcooked broccoli and ammonia. She was directed to the office of the Director of Operations, Beatrice Albright. The woman was exactly as Eleanor remembered from the awards gala. Tall, rail-thin, with severe dark hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. Her smile was a thin, bloodless line that conveyed no warmth whatsoever. She looked Ellie up and down, her gaze lingering on the cheap sneakers with an expression of faint disgust. "You're Ellie Mayhew," she stated, her voice as crisp and starched as her white blouse. "Human Resources pushed your application through, said you had life experience. Here, that means you're old enough to know not to complain." She slid a thin plastic name badge across the desk. "You'll be a resident assistant on the 3rd floor, West Wing. Your duties are feeding, bathing, and toileting. You will answer call bells within 3 minutes. You will chart everything. You will not engage in idle chit-chat with the residents. They are not your friends. They are your assignment. And you will maintain a professional, which means invisible, demeanor at all times. Are we clear?" The condescension was a physical thing, a sour taste in Eleanor's mouth. The CEO in her wanted to eviscerate this woman with a single, quiet sentence. But Ellie Mayhew, the desperate new hire, just nodded meekly. "Yes, Miss Albright, perfectly clear." The first few hours were a grueling ballet of inefficiency and quiet desperation. The West Wing was home to residents who needed the most assistance. Ellie was paired with a senior caregiver named Maria, a woman in her 50s with kind, exhausted eyes and a permanent slump in her shoulders. Maria moved with a practiced economy of motion, showing Ellie how to operate the mechanical lifts, how to change linens with a resident still in the bed, and how to spoon-feed a woman with advanced Parkinson's. The call bell timer is the only thing Miss Albright really cares about, Maria murmured, as they hurried from one room to another. She watches it from her office on the security feed. 3 minutes. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a crisis with another resident. 3 minutes. Ellie noticed other things. The linens, which were supposed to be high-thread count Egyptian cotton, felt thin and scratchy, like cheap motel sheets. The nutritional supplement shakes, meant to be a premium brand, were a generic version with a chalky aftertaste. The supply closet was perpetually low on essentials like incontinence pads and skin-protecting barrier cream. We just have to make do, Maria sighed, when Ellie pointed out the shortage. The budget is tight, Miss Albright says. Always tight. It was during the lunch service that Ellie first encountered Mr. Abernathy. He was in room 312, a bright corner suite with a view of the gardens. He was a retired history professor, sharp as a tack at 92, with a mischievous glint in his eye. When Ellie brought him his tray, he peered at the plate of greyish meatloaf and watery mashed potatoes with theatrical dismay. "Ah, the daily mystery," he quipped, his voice a dry rustle. "Is it animal, vegetable, or mineral? Place your bets, ladies and gentlemen." Ellie couldn't help but smile. "I believe it's designated as Hearty Country Loaf, sir." "A name that promises so much and delivers so little," he sighed. He looked at her more closely. "You're new. I haven't seen you before. What's your name?" "Ellie, sir." "Ellie Mayhew." "Well, Ellie Mayhew, welcome to the land of the forgotten. I'm Arthur Abernathy. Most people just call me Arthur." He paused, his gaze sharp and intelligent. "You have kind eyes. They don't look as tired as everyone else's yet. Give it a week." His words, meant as a joke, struck a deep, painful chord. The soul of her company wasn't in the profit margins or the real estate portfolio. It was here, in the dignity of a 92-year-old man who deserved better than mystery meatloaf. It was in Maria's aching back and the fear in the younger aide's eyes when Miss Albright walked the halls. The discomfort, the physical exhaustion, the manager's icy disdain. It all solidified into a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't a ghost in her own company. She was an infiltrator. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the foundation of her prettiest house was indeed starting to rot. The days melted into a grueling routine of aching muscles and small, accumulating heartbreaks. Ellie learned to navigate the complex social ecosystem of the third floor, a world of unspoken alliances and quiet sorrows. She learned which residents liked their coffee black, which ones had grandchildren who never visited, and which ones cried silently when they thought no one was looking. Eleanor Vance, the deal-maker, faded into the background, replaced by Ellie Mayhew, the witness. Her primary antagonist remained Beatrice Albright. The director seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to appear at the worst possible moments. Her critiques were constant, delivered in a low, cutting voice in front of residents or other staff. "Mayhew, that bed is not made to Vance living standards. The corners must be military grade. Do it again." "Mayhew, your voice is too familiar with Mr. Abernathy. Maintain professional distance." "Mayhew, your uniform appears rumpled. One would think you could afford an iron on your salary." Each barb was a small cut, designed to humiliate and control. Ellie absorbed them, filing each one away. This wasn't about her ego. It was data. It was evidence of a management style built on cruelty. She saw how the other aides flinched when Albright's heels clicked on the linoleum, how they avoided her gaze. This wasn't leadership. It was tyranny. Maria, her weary mentor, became her only confidant. During a rare, shared 15-minute break in the staff room, Huddled over lukewarm coffee, Maria opened up. "It wasn't always like this," she said, staring into her cup. "When this place first opened, it was wonderful. The founder, Miss Vance, she used to visit. She knew our names. She ate the same food as the residents, right in the dining hall. She said this place was a promise to her own father." Maria shook her head sadly. "Then she got big. The company went national. We never see her anymore. Now we just have her," she finished, with a subtle nod towards Albright's office. "It's all about cutting costs, squeezing every last drop. The heart is gone." The words were a dagger in Eleanor's own heart. "We never see her anymore." It was the truth. She had been so focused on growth, on expansion, on the view from the 60th floor, that she had lost sight of the ground. "Maybe she doesn't know," Ellie offered, her voice quiet. Maria gave a sad, bitter laugh. "They never know. Or they don't want to." A few nights later, Ellie discovered the second, more sinister layer of the rot. She had been tasked with restocking the medical supply closets, a job usually reserved for the night shift nurse. Albright, in another show of dominance, had insisted Ellie do it at the end of her own grueling double shift. As she was hauling boxes of supplies, she noticed a discrepancy. The inventory sheet she was given listed weekly deliveries of high-grade, name-brand medical supplies, everything from premium wound dressings to specialized dietary supplements. But the boxes she was unpacking were filled with cheap, off-brand products from a supplier she had never heard of. The packaging was flimsy, the quality visibly inferior. Curiosity piqued, she used her phone to discreetly look up the two companies. The premium brand was Vance Living's official, contracted supplier. The cheap one, Med-Equip Solutions, was a small, obscure distributor. A little more digging on the corporate registry website revealed the shocking truth. The sole proprietor of Med-Equip Solutions was a B. Alistair. A quick cross-reference confirmed her suspicion. B. Alistair's registered address was the same as Beatrice Albright's. The scheme was as simple as it was evil. Albright was using company funds to order premium supplies on paper, then secretly purchasing cheap, substandard products through her own shell company and pocketing the difference. She was stealing from the company while simultaneously endangering the residents with inferior products. The tight budget was a lie to cover her own greed. The rage that washed over Eleanor was glacial. This wasn't just poor management or bullying. This was fraud. This was a profound betrayal that put the health of every resident at risk. Hiding behind a stack of boxes, she took several clear, damning photos with her phone. The inventory sheet next to the cheap products, a close-up of the Med-Equip Solutions logo, and the shipping label addressed to The Pinnacle. The evidence was irrefutable. The next day, the facility was abuzz with a new kind of tension. A memo had circulated. Julian Croft was in the building. Even Ellie, in her short time there, understood the significance. Croft was a legendary investigative journalist, a Pulitzer Prize winner, known for his devastating exposés on corporate malfeasance and institutional neglect. His articles had toppled CEOs and prompted government investigations. His presence at the Pinnacle was the equivalent of a shark sighting at a public beach. Albright gathered the senior staff for an emergency meeting. Her face was a pale, tight mask of anxiety. "Julian Croft is here doing a lifestyle piece on luxury senior living," she announced, though her tone suggested she didn't believe the flimsy pretext. "He is to be given a carefully curated tour. He will only speak to pre-approved residents. Staff will answer his questions politely but briefly. Under no circumstances is he to be left unattended. Maria, you will be his primary escort. I am trusting you not to complain." "Mayhew," she snapped, her eyes landing on Ellie. "You will be on laundry duty for the rest of the day. I don't want him seeing our newest hire." It was another public humiliation, but for Eleanor, it was a strategic gift. Confined to the rumbling heat of the laundry room, she was off the radar, free to observe. She saw Julian Croft later that day. He was younger than she expected, in his late 40s, with intense, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had an air of weary cynicism, a man who had seen the worst of human nature and expected to see it again. He was being led on the curated tour by Albright herself, who was pointing out the art-filled hallways and state-of-the-art hydrotherapy pool with a sickeningly sweet smile. Ellie's path was set. She had to get to Croft. But how? She couldn't just walk up to him. Albright would have her fired and escorted out before she could say a word. She needed an opportunity, a moment when the careful curation fell apart. She found her chance through Mr. Abernathy. She knew he wasn't on the pre-approved list. He was too sharp, too unpredictable. She took her afternoon break and went to his room, ostensibly to collect his personal laundry. "Arthur," she said, her voice low and urgent. "There's a reporter here, Julian Croft. He needs to know what's really happening." Mr. Abernathy's eyes lit up with their old mischievous fire. "A fox in the henhouse, is he? And the head hen is in a panic, I presume?" "Exactly. They're keeping him away from anyone who will tell the truth. I need you to create a diversion. Something that will draw Ms. Albright away and give me a chance to speak with him alone." A slow, brilliant smile spread across the old professor's face. "A diversion, you say? My dear Ellie, chaos is my specialty." The pressure cooker that was the pinnacle at Crestwood Manor was about to explode. In the humid, lint-filled confines of the laundry room, Ellie folded towels with robotic precision, her mind racing. She was no longer just collecting evidence. She was planning an intervention. The arrival of Julian Croft had accelerated her timeline from weeks to hours. He was both a threat and her only viable weapon. If he wrote a story based on Albright's polished lies, the damage to Vance Living's reputation would be immense. But if he learned the truth, he could be the catalyst for the reckoning she was about to unleash. From her vantage point near a service elevator, she could occasionally glimpse the tour. Croft, with his journalist's poker face, nodded along as Albright waxed lyrical about their holistic wellness programs and chef-curated dining experiences. He was being shown the gleaming, unused demonstration kitchen, not the real one where the mystery meatloaf was born. He was introduced to a hand-picked resident, a former actress who still knew how to play a part, cooing about how the pinnacle was simply heaven. It was a masterful performance of deceit. Then, at precisely 3:15 p.m., Mr. Abernathy made his move. A piercing fire alarm began to blare through the facility. It was not a drill. The flashing strobe lights and automated voice confirmed it. Panic, muted but palpable, rippled through the staff. Albright's face went rigid. This was the ultimate unscripted disaster. "It's a false alarm, I'm sure," she said to Croft, her voice a little too high. "A sensor malfunction in the West Wing." But then a second alarm sounded, a specific medical emergency alert. The code blew from the main dining hall. A voice crackled over the PA system. "Code blue, main dining hall. Code blue." This was Mr. Abernathy's genius. He hadn't just pulled a fire alarm. While the staff was distracted, he had made his way to the dining hall, feigned a dramatic collapse, and had another resident press the medical alert button. He had created a two-front crisis. Albright was trapped. She couldn't ignore a code blue in front of a reporter. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled into raw panic. "Stay here," she commanded Croft, before turning to Maria. "You, handle the fire alarm. Find out what's going on." She then sprinted towards the dining hall, her composure shattered. This was Ellie's moment. The shark was unattended. She strode out of the laundry room, intercepted Croft in the hallway as he watched Albright retreat. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice calm and low. He turned, his eyes assessing her instantly, the cheap uniform, the tired posture. "Yes? My name is Ellie. The story you're being sold is a lie. The real story is in the supply closets. It's in the budget sheets in Director Albright's office. It's in the fear in the eyes of the staff." Croft's cynicism was a shield. "Everyone has a grievance, lady. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm not asking you to believe me," Ellie replied, her gaze unwavering. "I'm asking you to be a reporter. Ask to see the purchasing orders for medical supplies for the last 6 months. Compare them to the actual inventory. Ask why a facility this expensive is using off-brand products from a shell company called Med-Equip Solutions." She had given him a specific, verifiable lead, the holy grail for an investigative journalist. His eyes narrowed. That name, that detail had pierced his armor. He knew she wasn't just a disgruntled employee. This was something else. Before he could respond, a new crisis erupted, and this one was terrifyingly real. A young aide came running down the hall, her face streaked with tears. "It's Mrs. Gable, room 214. She fell. The lift malfunctioned. She's on the floor and I can't get her up." The mechanical lifts were essential for moving residents who couldn't support their own weight. A malfunction was a catastrophe. One of Albright's cost-cutting measures, Ellie suspected, was skimping on equipment maintenance. Ellie didn't hesitate. She broke into a run towards the second floor, Croft right on her heels, his reporter's instincts overriding Albright's command to stay put. They arrived at room 214, to a scene of controlled chaos. Mrs. Gable, a frail, bird-like woman with dementia, was on the floor beside her bed, moaning in pain. The young aide was sobbing nearby, helpless. The portable lift machine stood uselessly, its sling hanging limp, a red error light blinking ominously. "Her leg? I think it's her leg," the aide stammered. Ellie knelt beside Mrs. Gable, her voice gentle and soothing. "It's okay, Helen. We're here. We're going to help you." She quickly assessed the situation. The woman's leg was bent at an unnatural angle. A hip fracture, most likely. A common but life-threatening injury for someone her age. Moving her improperly could cause immense damage. Just then, Beatrice Albright appeared in the doorway, her face a thunderous mask of fury. She had cleared the code blue in the dining hall, only to be confronted with this genuine, reputation-destroying disaster. And standing right beside the fallen resident was the reporter she was so desperate to impress. Her eyes, burning with a cold fire, landed on Ellie. This was all her fault. This new, troublesome caregiver had somehow brought this chaos into her perfectly controlled world. "You!" Albright shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Ellie. "What are you doing here? You were assigned to the laundry. You are meddling in a situation you are not qualified to handle." "She needs an ambulance, Miss Albright," Ellie said calmly, not taking her eyes off Mrs. Gable. "And we need to stabilize her leg before they arrive." "I give the orders here!" Albright's voice rose, cracking with hysteria. She was no longer performing for the reporter. She was trying to reassert her dominance through sheer volume. "You have done nothing but cause trouble since you arrived. You are a disruptive influence, an incompetent. You are fired. Get out. Get your things and get out of my facility now." The public humiliation was brutal, the injustice of it breathtaking. She was firing the one person who was actually trying to help. Julian Croft watched the entire exchange, his expression unreadable, his mind recording every detail. Albright's shrieking panic, her utter lack of concern for the resident on the floor, her immediate move to blame a subordinate. And he saw Ellie, calm and competent in the face of the crisis, her focus entirely on the injured woman. Ellie looked up at Albright's hate-contorted face. She looked at Julian Croft, who was now seeing the unvarnished, ugly truth of Crestwood Manor. And she looked down at the terrified, pained face of Helen Gable. She did not argue. She did not protest her firing. She simply held Mrs. Gable's hand, her expression hardening into something unbreakable. "Fine," she said, her voice quiet but resonant with an authority that defied her station. Then she turned her head and looked directly at Julian Croft. "You're a witness to this," she said. Not as a plea, but as a statement of fact. "You are a witness to gross negligence, equipment failure, and a management culture that prioritizes blame over patient care. Now, are you going to stand there with your notepad, or are you going to call 911? The challenge hung in the air, electric. She had just been fired, yet she was the one in command. Albright stood frozen, speechless, realizing her catastrophic mistake. She hadn't just fired a lowly caregiver. In her blind rage, she had armed the most dangerous man in the room with a story that could burn her, and the entire company, to the ground. Standing on the manicured front lawn of the Pinnacle, the flashing lights of the ambulance washing over her, Eleanor Vance took a deep, steadying breath. The Ellie Mayhew persona dissolved like mist in the morning sun. The CIO was back, forged anew in the fires of the last few weeks. She watched as Mrs. Gable was carefully loaded into the ambulance. She had stayed until the paramedics had stabilized her, providing them with a calm, concise medical history that surprised them with its detail. Julian Croft stood a few feet away, his notebook forgotten, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning respect. Beatrice Albright was inside, frantically making calls, attempting to spin the narrative, unaware that the story was already out of her control. Eleanor pulled out her phone. Her first call was not to her COO or the board, but to Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," she said, her voice like chilled steel. "It's worse than we thought. I need you to do 3 things for me, immediately. First, get the best orthopedic surgeon in Boston on standby for a Helen Gable, incoming from Crestwood Manor. Her care is to be billed to my personal account. Second, I want a full security lockdown on Beatrice Albright's office. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Confiscate her computers and all financial records. Third, arrange a meeting, main conference room at the Pinnacle, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. I want the entire facility staff there, on the clock. And Marcus, make sure Julian Croft gets a personal invitation. Tell him the CIO of Vance Living has a statement to make." There was a brief pause. "Consider it done, Ms. Vance," Marcus replied, the satisfaction in his voice unmistakable. "Welcome back." The next morning, the main dining hall at the Pinnacle, usually a place of quiet breakfasts, buzzed with an anxious, confused energy. The entire staff, caregivers, nurses, cooks, janitors, was assembled. They whispered amongst themselves, speculating about the dramatic events of the previous day. Where was Miss Albright? Why was corporate security standing at her office door? Maria found Ellie standing near the back, looking out the window. "Ellie, you came back," she said, her voice filled with relief and worry. "I can't believe she fired you. It was monstrous. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Maria," Eleanor said, turning to her with a small, reassuring smile. "Everything is going to be fine." At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened. In walked Marcus Thorne, followed by 2 members of Vance Living's executive legal team. The staff fell silent, intimidated. A moment later, Julian Croft entered, taking a seat at a small, the air in room 214 became a vacuum, thick and unbreathable. Beatrice Albright's shriek of termination still echoed against the beige walls, a sound so brittle it seemed to crack the very plaster. For a heartbeat, there was only the pained, shallow breathing of Mrs. Gable on the floor, the frantic blinking of the malfunctioning lift's error light, and the silent, intense focus of Julian Croft's gaze. He was no longer a journalist taking notes. He was a seismograph recording a tectonic shift in power. Eleanor did not move. She remained on her knees, her hand a warm, steady anchor on Mrs. Gable's trembling arm. The Ellie Mayhew uniform felt like a costume she was about to shed, but the exhaustion in her bones, the ache in her lower back from lifting and turning and caring, that was real. It was a truth more profound than any balance sheet. She looked up, past Albright's contorted, disbelieving face, and met Croft's eyes. The challenge she had issued. Are you going to stand there with your notepad, or are you going to call 911? Was not a question of logistics. It was a moral ultimatum. Croft, without a word, pulled out his phone. His thumb moved with practiced speed. The authority in the room had transferred, not to the shrieking director, but to the fired caregiver on the floor. Albright saw it. The realization dawned in her eyes, a wave of cold horror that extinguished her rage, leaving behind the grey ash of panic. She had not just lost control of a situation. She had orchestrated her own execution in front of the one man who could broadcast it to the world. She opened her mouth, then closed it, a fish gasping for air in a polluted pond. No sound came out. Eleanor finally rose to her feet, her movements deliberate, imbued with a grace that seemed utterly alien to her drab uniform. She was no longer Ellie Mayhew, the harried aide. She was a general taking command of a battlefield. "Someone get a blanket for Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an absolute expectation of obedience. "And find me the maintenance logs for this lift. Now." The other aides, who had been frozen by Albright's tirade, snapped into action, galvanized by this new, calm center of gravity. Albright simply stood, shrinking into herself, as the world she had ruled with fear and spreadsheets dissolved around her. Eleanor walked out of the room and down the hallway, not waiting for the paramedics. She needed air. She stepped through the grand front doors, the ones she had only ever used as a CEO, never as an employee, and into the fading afternoon light. The manicured lawn, the perfectly pruned rose bushes, all felt like a mockery of the decay within. The first wail of a distant siren began to slice through the suburban quiet. She pulled out her personal phone, the sleek, cold glass, a foreign object after weeks of using a cheap burner. Her fingers were steady as she dialed the number she knew by heart. "Marcus." "Ms. Vance." Marcus Thorne's voice was a low, calm rumble. "I take it the experiment is over." "The experiment is over," she confirmed, watching the ambulance turn into the long, winding driveway, its lights painting strobing patterns of red and blue across her face. "The diagnosis is malignant. We're moving to radical surgery. I need you to execute 3 directives, effective immediately." She paused, listening to the crunch of tires on gravel. "First, I am sending you the details for a resident named Helen Gable. She is en route to Mass General with a likely hip fracture. I want the best orthopedic surgeon in Boston scrubbed in and waiting for her. Her care, rehabilitation, and any subsequent needs are to be covered indefinitely, billed directly to my personal accounts. I want her family contacted and assured that she will receive nothing less than the finest care in the world. No expense is to be spared, is that clear? Crystal, Miss Vance. Second, I want you to dispatch a corporate security team to the Pinnacle at Crestwood Manor. They are to secure the office of Director Beatrice Albright. No one enters or leaves. Nothing is to be touched. I want her computers, her files, her personal effects, everything impounded as of this moment. I have evidence of systematic fraud, Marcus, a shell company, supply chain manipulation, gross negligence resulting in injury. I want our forensic accounting team and legal counsel to meet security on site. They have until morning to build an airtight case. The Boston PD will be very interested in their findings. They're already on their way, Marcus said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. Third, Eleanor continued, her voice dropping, losing its clinical precision and gaining a raw personal edge. Cancel my schedule for the foreseeable future. I'm not coming back to the 60th floor. Not yet. I want you to arrange an all-staff meeting. Here, at the Pinnacle, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Every single employee, from the head nurse to the overnight janitorial crew, is to be there. And they are all to be on the clock. And Marcus, she took a deep breath, the scent of antiseptic from the open ambulance doors reaching her. Find Julian Croft. He's a journalist on site. Extend him a personal invitation to the meeting. Tell him the CEO of Vance Living would like to give him an exclusive. There was a moment of silence on the line, not of confusion, but of profound understanding. Arthur would be proud, Eleanor, Marcus said softly, using her first name, a rare intimacy reserved for moments of monumental importance. He always said the view from the ground was the only one that mattered. He was right, she whispered, and ended the call. That night, Eleanor didn't return to her penthouse. She stayed in a nearby hotel, but sleep was an elusive stranger. She stood for a long time in front of the mirror, looking at the woman staring back. It was her face, but it felt like a composite sketch. The weariness around the eyes belonged to Ellie Mayhew. The hard, resolute set of her jaw belonged to Eleanor Vance. She had gone undercover expecting to find a problem she could fix, a spreadsheet she could correct. Instead, she had found a moral sickness, and in witnessing it, a part of her had been irrevocably altered. She could still feel the phantom weight of Mrs. Gable's frail hand in hers. She could hear the echo of Maria's tired sighs, the desperate hope in her voice when she spoke of the old days. These were not data points. They were experiences that now lived inside her, a permanent part of her own foundation. The fraud she had felt in her kingdom was not just Albright's. It had been her own. She had built a beautiful house and then abandoned it, leaving its residents in the care of a wolf while she admired the architecture from a distance. The next morning, the main dining hall at the Pinnacle was a sea of anxious faces and nervous whispers. Every uniform was represented: the pale blue of the caregivers, the crisp white of the nurses, the dark green of the maintenance staff, the checkered pants of the kitchen crew. They huddled in small groups, trading rumors. Albright had been escorted out late last night. Corporate suits with grim faces had been going in and out of her office. And why was that reporter, the one from yesterday's chaos, sitting at a table by himself, a fresh notebook open before him? Maria found the woman she knew as Ellie standing alone by the large bay windows that overlooked the gardens. She looked different. The cheap polo shirt and slacks were gone, replaced by simple, well-fitting black trousers and a silk blouse. Her hair was pulled back, not in a haphazard tie, but in a simple, elegant twist. She looked rested, yet there was an intensity in her posture that hadn't been there before. "Ellie," Maria said, her voice a worried whisper. "You came back. I heard they let you go. What is all this? Are you in trouble?" The woman turned, and the smile she gave Maria was full of a warmth and a sadness that was utterly disarming. "No, Maria," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not in trouble. but I'm here to fix the trouble I allowed to happen. Thank you for being my friend." Before Maria could process the strange finality in her words, the main doors swung open. Marcus Thorne, imposing and silent, stepped inside, followed by two sharp-suited lawyers. The room fell into a hush. They moved to the front of the room, standing like sentinels. Then, the doors opened one last time. The woman who entered was the one Maria had just been speaking to, but she was also a complete stranger. It was a transformation so absolute it seemed to defy physics. She had put on a charcoal grey suit jacket, a piece of clothing so exquisitely tailored it seemed to reshape the very air around her. She moved not with Ellie's weary shuffle, but with a fluid, purposeful stride that commanded the attention of every person in the room. The quiet authority that had flickered to life in room 214 was now a blazing, unshielded fire. A wave of pure, uncomprehending shock washed over the assembly. Maria felt the blood drain from her face as her mind struggled to reconcile the two images: her tired, kind-hearted colleague and this formidable, elegant powerhouse. It was the same person. It was impossible. The woman walked to the lectern that had been set up at the front of the room. She adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the cavernous silence. Her eyes, the same kind eyes Mr. Abernathy had praised, swept across the room, and in them was a profound, sorrowful intelligence. "Good morning," she began. Her voice was Ellie's, but it was amplified, resonating with a clarity and power that vibrated through the floor. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the founder and CEO of Vance Living." A collective gasp, 100 sharp intakes of breath, stole the oxygen from the room. Maria stumbled back a step, her hand clamped over her mouth, her legs suddenly weak. Across the room, Julian Croft's pen, which had been poised to write, simply froze. A slow, astonished understanding dawned on his face as the puzzle pieces of the last 24 hours, the odd competence of the fired caregiver, the specific mention of a shell company, the sheer audacity of it all, slammed into place. Eleanor's gaze found Maria in the crowd, and for a moment it was filled with a deep, personal apology. Then she addressed the entire room. "I built this company on a promise to my father, a carpenter who died in a place that smelled of bleach and hopelessness. The promise was that no one under my care would ever suffer that same indignity. For 20 years I thought I was keeping that promise." Her voice grew quiet, heavy with confession. "I was wrong. I became a distant queen, ruling from a glass tower 60 floors high, reading reports that told me everything was perfect. I admired the blueprints, but I forgot that a home is not built with steel and glass. It is built with hands, with compassion, with trust. It is built by you." She let that sink in. "I came to fear that the foundation of my house was rotting, so I came here to see for myself. You knew me as Ellie Mayhew." A second wave of murmurs, of dawning recognition and disbelief, rippled through the staff. "As Ellie," she continued, her voice hardening with a cold, controlled anger, "I lived the truth of this place. I saw your exhaustion. I saw your dedication. I saw Maria, working a double shift, yet still finding the energy to soothe a resident who was having a nightmare. I saw the kitchen staff slipping an extra cookie to Mr. Abernathy because they knew it was his favorite. I saw 100 small acts of grace and humanity that will never appear on a quarterly report. You are the promise. You are the soul of this company, and the pride I feel to have worked among you is deeper than I can ever express." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. This praise, coming from the CEO of the company, who had just shared her lukewarm coffee and complained about her aching feet, was overwhelming. But I also saw a sickness. Eleanor's tone became glacial. A culture of fear, intimidation, and greed, cultivated by a director who valued profit margins over people. A sickness that resulted in faulty equipment, substandard supplies, and a resident, one of our family, lying in pain on the floor while her supposed protector screamed about protocol. As of 7 o'clock this morning, Beatrice Albright was formally charged with multiple counts of felony fraud, reckless endangerment, and embezzlement. She will never work in this industry, or any other, again. This time, the sound was not a gasp. It was an explosion. A spontaneous, cathartic eruption of applause and cheers swept through the dining hall. It was the sound of a pressure valve being released, of years of pent-up fear and resentment dissolving in a single moment of justice. Eleanor waited for the noise to subside, her expression unchanging. Ms. Albright's crimes were her own, but the environment that allowed her to flourish, that failure is mine, and mine alone. She looked out at them, her gaze unflinching, her voice stripped bare of all corporate artifice. I was not here. I did not listen. I failed you, and I failed our residents, and for that, from the very bottom of my heart, I am sorry. My apology will not be in words. It will be in actions, starting today, starting right now. She then turned her gaze to the reporter's table. Mr. Croft, you came here for a story on luxury senior living. You found a story of corruption and neglect instead. I will not ask you to soften a single word of it. In fact, I will give you my full cooperation. You will have access to the forensic reports, to the maintenance logs, to the evidence of Ms. Albright's fraud. Write the truth. Write about the rot. But I ask you to also write about what you see here today, about the people in this room who held this place together, not because of their management, but in spite of it. Tell the whole story. The healing is as important as the wound. Julian Croft slowly got to his feet. The cynical mask he wore like armor was gone, replaced by a look of profound, grudging respect. Ms. Vance, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. Yesterday, I saw a CEO's negligence lead to a woman's injury, but I also saw that same CEO on her knees, holding that woman's hand. I saw a director fired for incompetence, and I saw a leader who is now demanding accountability from the only person left to blame, herself. That is a far more interesting and a far more important story. And yes, I intend to tell all of it. The aftermath was not a swift corporate rebranding. It was a slow, painful, and deeply personal reconstruction. Eleanor Vance did not leave. The Pinnacle became her office, the dining hall her boardroom. Her first act was to call Maria into the director's office, the same office where she had been belittled and condescended to just days before. The nameplate on the door was gone, leaving a blank, golden rectangle. I need your help, Maria, Eleanor said, gesturing for her to sit in the large leather chair behind the desk. Maria hesitated, looking at the chair as if it were a throne. Please. Maria sat, her hands clasped nervously on the polished wood. I can read a balance sheet, Eleanor began, choosing to stand. I can negotiate a land deal. But I don't know the names of Mrs. Gable's grandchildren. I don't know that Mr. Abernathy needs his newspaper by 6 a.m., or he gets grumpy. I don't know how to calm a dementia patient who believes her husband is coming to pick her up. You do. The leadership of this facility was never in this office. It was always out there, in the hallways. I am asking you to be the interim director of the Pinnacle, not just in title. In truth. You will tell me what you need, more staff, better pay, new equipment, and you will have it. Your only mandate is the one I should have been enforcing all along. dignity above all else. Maria looked at her, the exhaustion of years warring with a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning of hope. We need more hands," she said, her voice barely a whisper at first, then gaining strength. "We need 2 more aides on every shift. We need the new lifts, the ones with the better safety sensors. We need a real activities director. And we need you to trust us." "You have it," Eleanor said, without a moment's hesitation. "All of it." The changes were immediate and seismic. Trucks arrived, not with cheap substitutes, but with the high thread count linens, the premium nutritional supplements, and the name-brand medical supplies that had been on the fraudulent purchase orders all along. A new chef, poached from a renowned Boston restaurant, took over the kitchen, and the smell of baking bread and roasting chicken began to replace the scent of ammonia. Eleanor's days were spent in relentless motion. She met with every single family, personally and humbly, explaining the betrayal that had occurred and the path forward. She sat with the staff, not as a CEO but as a student, listening to their grievances, their ideas, their hopes. She instituted the Ellie Mayhew Initiative, a permanent program requiring every senior executive to spend 2 weeks a year working undercover in an entry-level position within the company. "You can't read the soul of a company on a spreadsheet," she told her stunned board of directors. "You have to feel it in your bones." Weeks later, after Mrs. Gable was settled in the finest rehabilitation center in the state, her prognosis excellent, Eleanor found herself outside Mr. Abernathy's room. She knocked softly. "If you are the bearer of meatloaf, you may enter at your own peril," his familiar dry voice called out. She smiled and stepped inside. "It's roast chicken tonight, Arthur. I checked." He was by the window, a book in his lap. He looked at her, his eyes full of their familiar, mischievous intelligence. "Ah, the revolutionary returns to the front lines. I must say, things have improved dramatically since our little coup d'etat. Maria is a natural leader, a benevolent dictator, which is the best kind." He patted the chair next to him. "Sit. Tell me, Eleanor Vance, was it worth it? The aching back, the condescension, the terrible coffee?" Eleanor sat, looking out the same window he was. She saw 2 residents walking in the garden, a caregiver laughing with them. The sight was simple, ordinary, and more beautiful than any panoramic city view from the 60th floor. "It was the most important work I've ever done," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I came here to find a rot in the foundation, Arthur, and I found it. But I realized the foundation isn't the concrete slab this building sits on. It's the people. I had built a magnificent structure, but I had forgotten to make it a home. A common mistake among architects of all kinds," the old professor said wisely. He reached over and patted her hand, his touch light and papery. "You have kind eyes, Eleanor Vance. They looked tired when you were Ellie Mayhew. Now they look clear." She looked down at their hands, the retired academic and the prodigal CEO. In that quiet room, far from the world of mergers and stock prices, she felt the last vestiges of the fraudulent queen fall away. She hadn't just saved her company, she had saved herself from it. She had gone down into the dirt and grime of her own creation, and in doing so, had finally remembered what it was she had set out to build in the first place. Not an empire, not a brand, but a promise to her father, a place worthy of his name. And she was, at last, home.